Hello and welcome to another episode of Motorsport Speak, the motorsport podcast brought to you by Motorsport Week and motorsportmonday.com. My name's Dan Lawrence, and as ever to talk all things Formula 1, our editor Taylor Powling is joining me. We're here to chat about F1's night race, the Singapore Grand Prix, a dominant, almost Grand Slam victory from McLaren's Lando Norris to put pressure on Red Bull and Max Verstappen in the F1 title race. So let's jump into it. It wasn't a classic. It was the first Singapore Grand Prix without a safety car, which meant overtaking and chaos was at a premium. But Taylor, how are you, and did you enjoy the race?
Hi Dan, yeah, it was a bit processional. It didn't quite live up to the heights of Baku, but I don't think any of us were expecting that considering the circuit layout in Singapore and just how dominant McLaren were. There was some action. We had the Ferraris coming back through the pack, the Mercedes struggling on their tyres. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily a thriller. It was just more about McLaren crushing the opposition and Lando Norris reigniting the title race.
100%. I mean, yeah, it was. He put to bed his demons of not being able to lead the first lap from pole. So he's ticked that one off now, which is probably a relief for him and his race engineer and McLaren in general. And then from there, he was just controlling the pace, wasn't he? I mean, there was a point, I think it was, we hadn't even reached lap 10, I don't think, and his engineer, Will Joseph, said to he needed to pull out a 5-second gap, I think, by the mid-teens. And then the gap, by the time Norris came to pit beyond those laps, the gap was huge over Verstappen, and it ended up being quite a handy victory margin as well. I mean, there was a couple of nervy moments. He almost put it in the wall a couple of times, which would have, the headlines and the social media frenzy that would have happened had that occurred would have been quite remarkable. But yeah, Norris put together the best weekend he could, and that was pole and the victory. Interesting. We were talking up Oscar Piastri, weren't we, after Baku, saying how well he was doing, and he was the second best McLaren driver, wasn't he, this weekend? Qualified fifth and was able to recover to third and to complete the podium, albeit at quite a distance to Max Verstappen in second. I think it was a 20-second margin by the end. But obviously Piastri had to overcome the likes of the two Mercedes drivers who just went backwards. 52 points in the title race now, 6 rounds to go, including 3 sprints within that. It's going to be a hard task, I think, for Norris to get it done. This win's going to give him more of a confidence. It looks like McLaren is going to have the best car for the remaining races, but Verstappen and Red Bull salvaged second at Singapore, of all places, a track they really don't like. And on Friday, it looked like it was going to be a really tough weekend for Max and Red Bull, but they managed to pull it out of the bag there. But Norris said in the press conference the best he can do is the best he can do. That's his target for the remaining races. And I guess Verstappen, it's going to be damage limitation for the remaining races. It's going to be a tight fight to the end, I think.
Yeah, that's writing a feature piece on it that will go up on the website in the coming days. There's so many variables to this title fight, and I think this autumn break adds a bit more spice into the mix because it's given the team the time, unlike in the summer shutdown, to work on their last upgrades for the season. I think both Ferrari and Red Bull have updates planned for Austin, and you'd imagine McLaren will as well. And with how sensitive these cars are, and we've seen how upgrades not working have impacted the pecking order this year, all it takes is one misstep from either Red Bull or McLaren, and the title could swing Norris or Verstappen's way. As I put it in writing, the momentum's with McLaren and Norris, but the points in the drivers' championships with with Verstappen and Red Bull. So it's a really intriguing dynamic, and it's gonna. It could come down to fine margins. McLaren, you have to say, their car just works at every single circuit. We've seen it since summer break. We've had Zandvoort, Monza, Azerbaijan, Singapore, 4 different type of circuits, and they've been the most competitive at all of them on raw pace, whereas Red Bull, after a bit of a sticky patch, really did pull out the bag, as you said. Verstappen was brilliant. Obviously, he was helped by Red Bull making overnight changes to the car from Friday that managed to do the trick unlike Baku, but he pulled it out the bag on his one legal qualifying lap, as should I say. So yes, the Red Bull, I don't think was the second quickest car in Singapore. I think it was the Verstappen Red Bull combination that made it the second quickest car, and he'll be really happy with that second place. And I think he knows deep down that it is going to be a case of damage limitation at the end of the year. Just if he can get given if Red Bull can with this Austin upgrade, with the understanding they've had from Baku and Singapore, they seem to be back on the right track. If they can give Max a car where he can do what he was doing prior to Monza, which was just getting those podiums, he should get home and dry. The complication is if Red Bull, with how narrow the operating window of the RB20 is now, if they drop outside like Verstappen did in Baku and Norris actually, nails some consistency in the remaining 6 rounds, that's when those big points hauls could be coming out of his lead, and that could make it very nerve-wracking down at Red Bull.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if they give Verstappen the confidence to be able to get on the podium, if he's finishing just behind Norris, I think we know that that's going to be enough to secure the title. But yeah, if there's more Bakus than there are Singapores, then it might swing in Norris's favour if he can continue to be the one leading the charge for McLaren, as you say, not put a foot wrong and keep consistent. I think, as a track, Austin's probably a good one to not have too many. You're not going to have it's going to be difficult to crash out of qualifying at Kota and things like that. I mean, track limits could come into play, but I think your assessment of Red Bull not having the second quickest car in Singapore is underlined by the fact that Sergio Perez was out in Q3, got stuck behind cars that arguably weren't that quick, and finished 10th. So yeah, we definitely know that Red Bull probably wasn't the second quickest car on average in Singapore. I would argue that Ferrari had the second quickest car. So let's talk about them. Third in the Constructors' Championship, sort of on the outside of that fight now, and needing misfortune, I think, to fall Red Bull's way to get back into that sort of fight a bit more. Ferrari obviously had a nightmare qualifying session. Carlos Sainz crashing before he was about to start his first attempt in Q3. Basically I think he cooled his tyres down too much before going for a run in clear air and got it wrong and stuffed it into the barriers. That then forced a lot of the drivers, including Leclerc, to only have one run in Q3, and then he abused track limits, so he was 9th. I mean, they did very well to finish 5th and 7th. Leclerc in that final stint was coming on strong, just didn't have the pace to overcome George Russell. Mercedes were definitely slower than Ferrari in race trim because they both went backwards. So it was a real big missed opportunity for Ferrari, wasn't it, really? Because I think arguably they could have been fighting on the podium.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in the hands of Leclerc, because he was rapid in that last stint, and a lot of team principals acknowledged that the Ferrari, and even Fernando Alonso actually acknowledged that Ferrari had a car to win the race. And with the mistakes Norris made out front when he was under minimal pressure, you have to wonder how he would have coped if he had Leclerc breathing down his neck, because that could have easily swung the picture and led Norris into a race-defining mistake quite easily. But it wasn't to be. Ferrari instantly ruled out their chances, as you said, with that qualifying fiasco. And with the tracks remaining, you would have to say, although they've made improvements with the upgrades at Monza, they still don't have a car that can stand to beat McLaren on outright pace, especially on conventional circuits where we're expecting McLaren to be really strong at the likes of Austin and Brazil. So this was a really big missed opportunity for Ferrari, and I think they'd be disappointed not to take a podium from it. Yeah,
it was one of the tracks, wasn't it, that Fred Vasseur cited as being one where they could extract a good result. I think it was prior to the summer break, wasn't it? He said that Monza, Baku, Singapore were the 3 tracks where they should really flourish at. And obviously Monza, they picked up the win. Baku, they narrowly missed out on the win. Singapore, they fell well short of that expectation. So, yeah, as you say, it's probably going to be harder for them to extract results moving forward. Talking of it being difficult of extracting results, Mercedes qualifying 3rd and 4th, they really would have been hoping for a lot better than 4th and 6th. They made the mistake, didn't they, of putting Lewis Hamilton on a soft tyre for the start, which we've seen video clippings of him saying he was arguing with the team, please let me start on the mediums, but they split the strategy, hoping that Hamilton could make up positions in the early laps of the race, but that didn't come to fruition, and then it was just nursing the soft tyres, and then having to pit early and then just losing ground that way with the extra long hard stint at the end. So yeah, Hamilton wasn't a happy bunny. But then even with George Russell, there just wasn't the inherent pace in the car when Hamilton pitted. George wasn't able to shake Piastri. Leclerc nearly beat both of them in the Ferrari, having started in ninth. So it's quite clear that Mercedes, they're just struggling with the balance, aren't they? And as you say, we've been talking about McLaren and Red Bull about upgrades, and upgrades could unlock balance issues. They could put you down these sort of rabbit holes of poor performance or struggling to find performance. And it's the same with Mercedes. They've fluctuated so much this year, starting way off the pace, about 40 seconds off the pace at the start of the year, progressing into the summer months to be able to take victories before the summer break, coming back from the summer break and then seemingly having that same deficit to the front again. It's really remarkable, and I think the autumn break is as important as it is for the likes of Red Bull to recapture winning form. It's equally as important for Mercedes to figure out how they developed their car into the right window and then developed it back out again.
Yeah, they've got a package coming for Austin, and it's important to note that with the regs changing in 2026, the basis of these cars will form a large part of what the teams are doing in 2025. So Mercedes will be desperate to get an understanding of their car again, and not be in this conundrum where they don't know what's going to happen. I think it's clear to see that the qualifying efforts that Russell and Hamilton put in were an outlier in terms of, say, competitiveness in Singapore, because practice they were nowhere, and then in the race they were relatively nowhere compared to the other top teams. James Allison said after the race that the characteristics of Singapore accentuated their difficulties. They struggle with circuits where there's rear overheating, and I think that was evident in the race, and they didn't actually help their cause at all by putting Hamilton on the softs, because he was forced to pit really early on, and then that just left him so exposed at the end that he had no rubber left, and in fact he was fortunate to come ahead of Carlos Sainz. So yeah, I mean, taking Mercedes weekend in isolation without qualifying, you'd have to say that's just where they were, but based on where they started and the heightened expectations, yeah, really disappointing showing.
Yeah, you definitely think they would have been hoping for more, especially Hamilton, who's obviously had a lot of success at Singapore as well over the years. Yes, so I think fairly well-established pecking order of the top teams. McLaren fastest, arguably Ferrari second fastest, Red Bull and Mercedes sort of vying for the third, fourth fastest spots. I mean, I'd even lean towards Red Bull having a quicker car than the Mercedes, but I think it's marginal. Again, in sort of limbo in the championship in fifth, Aston Martin appeared to be sort of at the front of the midfield and in that sort of limbo position of fifth again. If you look at Fernando Alonso's car, he was able to qualify in the top 10, finish in the top 10, pick up that 8th place, sort of behind the top runners. Stuck behind the Haas, but was able to overcome him through the pit stop phase. So not a terrible weekend for Aston Martin, but again, I don't think the likes of Austin isn't going to be a circuit that plays into their hands. So that midfield sort of fluctuating is going to occur even more. And I mean, the story of Aston Martin this year is it's not really one to chew into too much. They're a fair distance off of the top 4 teams, and they've got a comfortable margin over the teams behind them. They're in no man's land. The fight for P6 in the constructors, however, is much more interesting. With Nico Hülkenberg again just showing what he does, and that is qualifying with rapid speed and taking P5 on the grid, was it in the end? And holding on to 2 points in the race. I mean, he's frustrating the likes of Aston Martin's Alonso. He was frustrating Sergio Perez, holding them all up throughout various points of the race. It was Leclerc, actually, wasn't it, that he was holding up in that first stint. And then holding on to those 2 points, with RB having a difficult weekend. Haas are now only 3 points behind RB in the championship. So that's where the really interesting midfield fight is, rather than Aston Martin.
Yeah, definitely Aston Martin in no man's land. It will be no surprise to you or anyone that Alonso was hyping up his own efforts post-race. His actual quote was, "It was better than Aston Martin's best dreams." And to be fair, on this occasion, he does actually have a point, because Stroll was anonymous all weekend. He was absolutely nowhere, whereas Alonso topped the midfield group in qualifying and then did the same in the race. He drove a very good race around the streets once again, just like Baku, and he mentioned as well that although Aston Martin had the pace to do that, the car wasn't handling very well, so he's still kind of demanding that they make the change going into 2025 that both made the car quicker and easier to drive. but behind them, you'd have to say the impetus is with Haas now. RB, they've brought upgrades throughout the season that just haven't worked. It spirals from the Spanish Grand Prix upgrade, which they accelerated to try and actually catch up to Aston Martin, and then that ended up being a setback. And having not understood that fully, they've introduced more parts, and it seems they've gone the same way with the upgrades at Monza. So, whereas Haas look like a team that have a car that can be competitive everywhere to nab those 9th and 10th places, RB look like they would be scoring for the rest of the year.
Yes, I mean, it's a shame for RB as well, given the fact that Tsunoda qualified really well in getting into Q3. But yeah, they just didn't have the pace on race day. Maybe strategy calls were a bit dubious as well. I think they got undercut by quite a few people with Tsunoda. One part of strategy that RB played, obviously, with Daniel Ricciardo having a pretty poor weekend. There wasn't a great qualifying performance from him, to say the least, out in Q1. And then in the race, obviously he was then used as a Red Bull pawn to pit for a fastest lap attempt right at the end to wrestle a point away from Norris. And the sort of cloud lingering over Ricciardo the whole weekend was the fact that Singapore was likely to be his last Grand Prix. At the time of recording, we are pretty 100% confident that an announcement is on the way, that by the time this is out, people will learn that Liam Lawson's going to be in Ricciardo's seat for the rest of 2024. And it's just, I mean, we were talking not too long ago around Spa about potentially Ricciardo replacing Perez at Red Bull, and then all of a sudden it's turned on its head. And we did say it was either going to be, he was either going to get a promotion or lose his seat, and it's swung the other way with Lawson getting the nod for the rest of the year. And it's just a shame that on a weekend it sort of happened in a way as it did. Ricciardo's obviously had a really great Formula One career, barring these sort of years of strife towards the end, and it wasn't a nice send off.
No, it was all a bit bizarre, really, wasn't it? The fact that everyone knows effectively that it's his last race, and he's getting this really nice goodbye at the paddock, and it's really all emotional, and he's getting all this adulation online for driver of the day. Yet there's no clarity on the situation, and you've got even RB's team principals then in the press release that given it might be Daniel's last race. It's baffling that Red Bull have allowed the silence to go on all weekend, and I think it's wrong in many respects, because I think you could tell over the weekend it took a mental toll on Ricciardo. He joked after qualifying that after his Q1 exit that he'd go drown in my ice bath, and at face value that was taken as typical Ricciardo joking around. But I think there was a deeper meaning behind that, and it did show how much the pressure was mounted on his shoulders. And in some ways, I think for him, although he's disappointed that it's not been the fairy tale ending, he'll be at peace with what he's done, and kind of relieved in some ways that this constant questioning about his prospects will now come to an end.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. And I wonder, I mean, we'll probably find out, won't we, in Drive to Survive, but I imagine he was probably told at some point during the Singapore weekend, hopefully early on, potentially. I imagine that conversation's happened in the team, and it's just a case of the delayed way of delaying the announcement until when it has been delayed to is what created all the uncertainty, and Ricciardo having to face questions, and team bosses having to face questions on the matter when obviously they know about it, but they can't say until it's officially announced, which is always a tricky thing to navigate, isn't it? And then obviously I think the reasoning of putting Lawson in the car, obviously he had that stand in last year when Ricciardo hurt himself and did a very fine job, and arguably was ready to take a full-time drive and didn't get that opportunity. He's been patient. Red Bull have now seen the likes of Ollie Behrman jump into a Ferrari and a Haas and excel quickly. They've seen the likes of Franco Colapinto jump into the Williams mid-season and excel straight away. Kimi Antonelli impressed with his brief flash in FP1 at Monza. I think Horner and Red Bull, they've got Lawson waiting in the wings, and they want to have another look at him and to see if they've got another young star on their hands like the other teams do. And the thing with Red Bull as well, they've got other drivers queuing up in the junior ladder. There's obviously Isaac Hadjar, who's probably going to lose out on the F2 title now, but was in the lead of it for quite a while. Maybe not the driver that they're looking at the most in the junior ladder, because what I've noticed is often when they speak about the Red Bull driver pool, Christian Horner is talking about Arvid Lindblad, the British driver who's just finished his F3 campaign and will be moving up to F2 next year. there's a lot of talk around him and that he's a promising star of the future. So I think they want to assess Lawson quick, see if he's good enough, and then maybe potentially see if he can progress up into Red Bull to keep that that funnel of drivers moving nicely, because it has stagnated in recent years, the Red Bull driver pool, quite considerably, with sort of Perez and Ricciardo and Tsunoda being around. But yeah, talking of Colapinto as well, another really impressive result from him, finishing just outside the points. He ruled the fact that they pitted a few laps too late. James Vowles agreed. There was the lunge at turn 1 from P12 to P9, which was very impressive. He's just doesn't look out of place in Formula 1. He's really close to Albon's pace already, going to tracks he's never been to before. It's quite exciting to see. Hopefully, I mean, we've talked about it at length, so we don't need to go on about it again. But yeah, hopefully he could maybe worm his way into the Audi seat, because it looks like he really does deserve to stay in Formula 1 beyond his cameo of, 9 races that he's going to have in total by the end of the season. And yeah, it was a shame for Williams not to pick up points, because they had a good car at Singapore, and since they've had their upgrades, they've been strong at every track, haven't they, in that midfield fight. And yes, less doom and gloom around Williams than there is around one half of the RB garage, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's been very nice to see Colapinto's kind of emergence. The fact that he's been unwavering throughout the whole experience. He had that one FP1 crash in Baku, and you thought that might derail his weekend, but then he goes on and rebounds and bags points from it. And there's a clear match for Albon. And then his move at turn 1, it was just in Singapore, was just breathtaking. The bravery he had, and it is really nice to see these youngsters coming through and just kind of not being scared about the magnitude of the situation they're in, or going up against more experienced rivals. And an interesting note that I think will develop is Albon's initial response to Colapinto's move, which kind of put Albon down the order, was as much of a natural reaction as it was kind of the pressure getting to him. That because in Albon's situation, he's got everything to lose. If he beats Colapinto, he's expected to. If they're closely matched, it looks bad on Albon. If he gets beat, it reflects badly on him as well. He's had quite a comfortable time at Williams since he joined. He was up against Latifi and Sargent, 2 drivers that he had covered, and that really, built his reputation up. Next year, he's going to be up against a multiple-time race winner in Carlos Sainz, someone who will be expected to elevate the team, and you'd have to say probably is a better driver than Albon. The fact that Colapinto, as a rookie, has come in and is basically matching Albon, that doesn't necessarily bode well for him going up against Sainz, but it also might show how good Colapinto is. If Sainz comes in and is at the same level as Albon is now compared to Colapinto, then that shines really bright on the Argentine, and you'd have to hope that, although there's no room at the Williams in and it looks like Sauber are going to stay with Bottas for next year, that in 2026 Colapinto can find a place on the grid, because he would fully deserve it based on the 3 races he's done so far.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think I was aware of Colapinto being good. I mean, the fact that he did, he was very good in F3 last year, came up into Formula 2 his rookie season. He picked up a race win. He's been in the hunt for podiums. He's been feisty. He's been, aggressive in races in Formula 2. But yeah, for the fact that him to be able to learn so quickly, immediately put to bed the debate about whether it was the right idea to get rid of Sargent in favour of Colapinto. I mean, Colapinto's already proven he's, a different calibre of F1 driver, and to be so close to Albon, yeah. I mean, you got to hope that maybe for Albon's sake, it is Colapinto just proving how good he is. And it is a shame, yeah, as you said there with Sauber, it looks like they're leaning towards Bottas, which is great for Bottas actually, to stay in the sport. But with Williams having long-term deals locked down for both Albon and Sainz, having Colapinto as their academy driver, obviously wanting to keep a hold of him, it is going to sort of make things difficult for Colapinto to get back into F1, which is, it's always a shame to see things like that. It was a shame to see Lawson miss out after doing so well last year, and it will be the same sort of feeling again with Colapinto. Talking of things that are a shame, we haven't covered really Alpine and Sauber, because obviously they were just bringing up the rear of the field pretty much in Singapore. Alpine, they had that sort of brief, didn't they, at brief glittering moment in the sort of a few months ago where they were able to fight for positions around the fringe points places or even get in the points, but that's been and gone, that sort of flash in the pan, hasn't it? And they've reverted back to sort of where they were prior in the early rounds of the season. And Singapore again was just not a good weekend for them. And then obviously the less said about Sauber, the better, really. You know more about this than me, obviously, the Bottas rumour. So let's talk about that. It's from my understanding, I've heard that it's a 1-year deal that's being floated around.
Yes, that is the rumour going around, which when I spoke to him exclusively at Zandvoort, he was insistent that he wanted a multi-year deal. It wasn't a 1-year deal that he was looking for. I presume that they've come to a compromise and Bottas's decision is, look, it's better to have a 1-year deal and remain in the sport than exit altogether over just, quite frankly, pettiness. It remains to be seen whether Sauber are gonna, and Mattia Binotto especially, is gonna use that opportunity next year to, evaluate Bottas and think, okay, is this someone we can build the team around for the medium term, or whether it's a case of, with where the team's at the back, they want his experience to help bring them forward, and then when the market kind of opens up a bit more and they've got more options and drivers are more inclined to go to Sauber, will they then ditch him? That remains to be seen. I think that's the big question mark, but it's definitely going to be interesting, I think, to see Hulkenberg against Bottas, because it would be a bad look for Audi if the guy that they were dithering over re-signing ends up beating the driver that they've handed a long-term deal to.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I guess the only saving grace there is we all know that Hulkenberg's kind of got that seat based on nationality. I think it'd be good to see the qualifying matchup, because obviously they're both renowned as being pretty quick qualifiers. I think, again, it might wake Bottas up a bit to be up against someone of Hulkenberg's level as opposed to Zhou. So there might be a bit of more motivation there. But yeah, it's strange. Obviously, Bottas has been going on about long-term deals, hasn't he, this whole time? And now he's going to have a 1-year deal, again, in a car that, let's face it, it's probably going to be the 10th quickest. It's going to be the slowest car on the grid again next year. So it's hard. It's going to be hard for him to prove himself, isn't it? It's hard to prove yourself when you're in a car that is off the pace compared to the rest of the field. And perhaps that is why maybe the likes of Gabriel Bortoleto and Franco Colapinto, they've actually looked at it and gone, that could be a career killer. Do I want my first full season in Colapinto's case, or first season in Bortoleto's case? Do we want that to be in a car that's right at the back of the grid? It's going to be, rid me of my confidence in the way we've seen happen to Zhou. I'm not going to score points. I'm only going to be measured up against one person, rather than being, injected into a midfield team like the likes of Jack Doohan's going to be in the Alpine. And you'll imagine the Alpine will fluctuate between, 7th, 8th, 6th fastest, and he'll be able to battle not just Gasly but other drivers as well and prove his worth. So perhaps those younger drivers have maybe looked at that and gone, maybe that's not the situation for me. I mean, equally for Sauber's case, and as you said with Binotto, to be able to assess Bottas over a year might be a good idea, but also for a team that really needs to improve, having two experienced drivers. You see Haas use that model for quite a while and perhaps reaping the benefits of it now, having two experienced drivers to help develop the team, so you don't have to worry about bringing on a young driver when you've got plenty of other things to worry about, which Sauber do. So it'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, as bad as Guan Yu Zhou's been this season relative to Bottas, as you said, drivers are the last thing that Audi and Sauber have to worry about at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. They've got bigger things to sort in time for Audi to come in 2026, which I think has been one of the key themes of our podcast this year, is talking about that situation. When it resolves itself, we'll be able to move on to a different topic, I suppose. But yes, that was the Singapore Grand Prix. We've now got another break in the calendar, not that long after the summer break, not quite as long as the summer break, about 3.5 weeks until mid to late October, when we return to action at Austin, Texas, which is always a great Grand Prix weekend, full of fans and full of action, and it's a great circuit. So looking forward to that. Thank you, Taylor, for joining me today. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. Make sure to like, subscribe, catch us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you stay up to date with Motorsport Week and motorsportmonday.com, and keep up to date with us on socials at Motorsport Week on X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. I think that's it. LinkedIn if you like. But yes, thank you and goodbye.